asked Brandy and T1 if I could use this mic because it's a lot cooler, so I'm going to just raise it up a little bit. Let's give it up one more time for T1 and Parker. And you know, in my former life, I was an MC, sort of, so this mic is kind of fitting. Where is T1? Did he leave? Oh, okay. My brother. Love you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for convincing me to do things that sometimes I don't like doing. But I think that's the point of this conversation today. I think that's the point of being a creative. Thank you, Parker. And it feels good to bring T1 out of retirement. And thank you, Brandy, the whole Creative Mornings team, and my family and friends that showed up today, and all my new friends. So, as Brandy mentioned, today's topic is growth. So my conversation is going to be based around the concept of rooms. As creatives, how can visiting spaces, both physically and mentally, grow ourselves, our work, and our community? How many people know these guys? Any Outkast fans in the building? Great. Probably one of the greatest hip hop groups of all time, you know, arguably. I'd also like to say that as a kid from New York, I was one of the first people in my high school to have an Outkast tape. And I actually discovered Outkast on Rap City. How many people used to watch Rap City? I'm dating myself. And MTV Jams and Yo MTV Raps, but that's when, you know, hip hop was sort of in its pre-commercial phase. It was exploratory. You know, the media outlets were just kind of throwing things out to see what stuck. And, you know, Outkast kind of stuck with me. They're one of my favorite groups. You know, Andre 3000 and Big Boy, natives of Atlanta, met in high school as teenagers, joined the musical collective Dungeon Family, and were the first hip hop artists to be signed to LaFace Records in 1993. And I can run through their resume, but they've gone on to do amazing things. And when I think of creatives and how growth and evolution and how they've always stayed true to themselves, they were sort of the impetus of this conversation today. You guys, anybody saw their induction speech for the Rock Hall? So in my conversation today is inspired by Andre's quote, "Great things start in little rooms. We started in a little room." When I think about what Andre was saying, I think about him referring to the Dungeon Family, those early days with Organized Noise, their producers, R.I.P. Rico Wade. You know, it was that creative laboratory where everything started. I thought about little rooms as in the literal sense, as physical spaces, that Dungeon Family basement where they were making creations. Those could be your studios, those can be your apartments, those can be any place where your ideas are shaped. Those early incubators of creative growth. But as I sat with this quote and I sat with, you know, what I was going to talk about today, I started to think to myself, what if those little rooms that Andre was referring to are not only the physical spaces, but our inner selves as well? If great things start in little rooms, then our greatest growth starts in the little rooms inside of us. How we care for those rooms shapes our art, our careers, and our communities. But, you know, as a kid from New York, I had a love of hip hop, Legos, Calvin and Hobbes, comics, and sketchbooks were my life. I think of those early rooms that I had. One of my first was my bedroom. It was small in square footage, but it was large in imagination. I had an old wooden desk, you know, I used to keep G.I. Joes in the drawer and my Game Boy, early sketch pads. But it was a safe space where I could create and where I could dream. Those, you know, my earlier rooms after that were my dorm room at CCAD, where I spent all-nighters experimenting, doing class projects. I also think of my first office when I started my business, Milk Crate Concepts, 300 square feet. We did graphic design and full color printing for a lot of local musicians here in Columbus in the early 2000s. I think of my later rooms in my creative career as a graphic designer at Who's Who, working at Radio 1, also at OSU, and then how those smaller rooms have grown into bigger rooms as I lead a great team, and Carisha Gamble, who's on my team here at Orange Barrel Media, as we lead community engagement around the country. My earlier rooms were not glamorous. They were tight, messy, and full of uncertainty. Over time, I realized that these little rooms showed up in 3 dimensions: inside me, and around the people that I chose to be in community with. So today I'm going to hit on those 3 rooms. So inner rooms. When I say inner rooms, I mean that those private spaces within you that nobody has access to. This is the room that no one sees. It's behind the scenes, it's the shadow work, it's the journaling, it's the therapy, it's the late night thinking, the conversations with your spouse. Thank you for my wife who showed up today. It's the habits and the healing that shape the work before the work is ever seen, before it hits the gallery, the page, or the screen, before it hits your audience. There's a tension within these rooms. They're rarely comfortable. That's where all those insecurities, that imposter syndrome grows, those old stories of failure, and growth usually hides in those questions we would rather not ask ourselves. And there's a connection to community within these, right? When your inner room grows, our work becomes a lot clearer because you're kind of taking that time to think and work on yourselves. And I think that some people think that is selfish, but I think that helps us be better creatives, right? When our work gets clearer, our communities feel that clarity, and then we are able to build, we are able to determine how we lead and how we show up for ourselves and one another. And then one quick question that I have for the audience, and this could be rhetorical, but you guys can answer it if you want. What are you working on in yourself that no one else can see? So just kind of sit with that. Those physical rooms. When I say physical rooms, I mean the actual spaces where you sit down and you do the work. So that could be your studio, your home office, the kitchen table, or this coffee shop. These are the rooms where the real reps happen, where the sketches, the rehearsal, the edit, the design, the prototype, the writing, and the eventual shipping of that thing, that product. The crazy part about these spaces, they rarely feel perfect, and I think sometimes we try to make them perfect, but it's those imperfections that make them great. When they feel small and messy, and they feel makeshift, I think that's a good thing. And a lot of us are secretly waiting for that dream studio, that dream space before we really fully show up. There's also a connection to community that shows impact in these spaces, because these tiny imperfect rooms are where the projects start that eventually shape our neighborhoods, our audience, and our institutions. Every mural, every album, or program we admire started in those small spaces, in those small rooms. Just like the one that I started off in, that you all started off in, and that Outcast started off in. And then a question that I have for you as well is, what are you working on in these spaces that no one else has seen yet? So just kind of curious. What's the world waiting on from you? And then we're going to talk about collective spaces. These are the spaces where we do not create alone. So these could be classrooms, these could be collectives, organizations, your teams at work, or your neighborhoods. I think of Outcast and the Dungeon Family and how they started off in a literal basement in Atlanta. This space in Atlanta was, this thing is skipping around on me. Where that collaboration started, where that creation started, They didn't do it alone. They had a village and a family. Today, what's your version of your dungeon family? Who's your community that you're relying on for that creative spark, for that community? It could be your mentors. It could be your CreativeMornings family. This is also where you kind of prepare yourself for the next step and, break down some of those walls of vulnerability by sharing with your community. So growth and change, stretching the walls without losing yourself. I think Outkast is a really good example of this. When I think of their first project, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Funky Music, to Equimini, to Stankonia, to Speaker Box and The Love Below, they always kept their core identity, but they evolved personally and collectively and sonically. But they always kind of came back to themselves to find that place. They took huge risks, as I was talking to Parker about, and they evolved with every project, with a different sound and through experimentation. But they always return to that little room, that basement, that collective within Dungeon Family, those creative collaborations. As I personally reflect, I think I used to think that change, this type of change, would make me less authentic. I was worried that evolving would betray who I was when I started. I learned that real growth is not about abandoning that little room, but about stretching its walls, exploring new rooms, and inviting folks into those rooms once I'm in them. And then I'm gonna leave you with three short points. Protect your little rooms. Identify the spaces that matter to you for your growth, revisit them, put a boundary around them. Make sure you designate time in those rooms, cell phone free. And make sure you dictate the access to people that you bring into that space. But also invite new voices in, form your collective. Your collective is your currency. Collaboration circles back. And when I think of collaboration, I'm circling back again to the Dungeon Family, who kept evolving by bringing in new voices, new members into the collective, but they all helped uplift outcasts in their work as a group. That was their support system. This is how growth becomes communal and not just personal. And then the third point is carry the little rooms into the big rooms. So those board rooms, those client meetings, those big stages, and your work. The big rooms feel different when you have done the inner work and honored the small ones. A couple practices: invest in your mental health, mentorship, your personal health, coaching, building your skills. Bring those values from the little rooms into your leadership and collective rooms. Protect those rooms where your next version of yourself is being built. In closing, little rooms create big impact and growth. If we treat our little rooms with care and intention, our work will grow. Our confidence will grow, and so will our communities. When we grow, we have more to offer. Our projects, our partnerships, and leadership roles become bigger rooms that still carry the spirit of those tiny beginnings. I'm Corey Favor. You can follow me on Instagram at cfave1. I'm on LinkedIn at Corey Favor. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you for friends and family and new faces that showed up to hear about growth, a little bit about my career, and I wish you well. Thank you for your time today.